Hello, I'm Jeff Brown, and welcome to the wide world of cinema. Tonight, I want to talk about a movie that unsettled me, Chand Mera Deal. Not because it was graphic, not because it was political, not because it was trying to shock me. It unsettled me because it quietly forced me to confront parts of my own life that I had spent decades compartmentalizing. The film itself is actually very simple. It starts with a young man returning home after getting his master's degree in America. He reconnects with his old friends from undergrad, and during a reunion, a woman comes out on stage to perform a dance. And when he sees her, his whole face lights up. So naturally, I thought, okay, this is going to be a love story. But the movie slowly reveals that this woman is not someone he's about to fall in love with. She's his ex wife. And then the film starts unfolding the history between them: a pregnancy during undergrad, an agreement to have an abortion that she ultimately could not go through with, marriage, resentment, pressure, financial struggle, domestic violence, divorce, regret. And what struck me immediately was how delicately the film handled all of it. No preaching, no speeches, no stopping the movie every 5 minutes to tell the audience what the correct position is supposed to be. Just human beings trying to navigate impossible emotional terrain. And honestly, I don't know if contemporary Hollywood, at least based on its recent track record, would trust audiences enough to tell a story like this that way. Because this film understood something important. Sometimes the most powerful thing cinema can do is simply hold up the situation honestly and let the audience wrestle with it themselves. The abortion storyline especially stayed with me, not because the film took a side, but because it understood the emotional gravity of the decision, the confusion, the pressure, the connection, the fear, the uncertainty. It treated the situation like something human beings were actually living through instead of reducing it to political shorthand. And while I was sitting there watching those scenes, I suddenly found myself remembering something I had not thought about in years. Before law school, I was a pharmaceutical sales representative for Johnson and Johnson in Oregon. And one of the doctors in my territory was one of the largest abortion providers in the Portland area. This was back during a very tense time in America when abortion providers were being targeted, threatened, their names and addresses circulated online. Some of these doctors wore bulletproof vests to work. And one day, I asked if I could observe a procedure. He said yes. It was a late term abortion. I remember standing in the room. I remember the smell. I remember the silence. I remember the young woman cramping during the procedure. At one point, the doctor asked me if I would hold her hand to comfort her. So I did. Afterward, I remember him explaining that because it was a late term procedure, legally, he had to make sure every part was accounted for. And I remember standing there realizing these are not abstract conversations. These are human moments, human consequences, human pain, human uncertainty. And sitting in that theater all these years later, that memory came rushing back because of a movie. And there was another detail in the film that stayed with me. The woman explains at one point that ever since she was a little girl, she grew up listening to her parents fight constantly: violence, arguments, fear. That was the emotional atmosphere of her childhood. But what struck me was this: you never would have guessed it looking at her. She was beautiful, intelligent, disciplined, accomplished, a mechanical engineering student. And that detail hit me because I was an engineering major myself before switching to economics. I know what those classes demand: combinatorics, statics, dynamics, differential equations. Those classes require concentration, precision, attention to detail. You do not drift your way through engineering school emotionally distracted all day. And yet, somehow, she had learned to carry all of that emotional weight while still functioning at a very high level. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that's what a lot of people are doing: veterans, teachers, prosecutors, doctors, parents. People carry enormous unseen emotional weight while still getting up every day and functioning. And sometimes they function so well that nobody even realizes what they're carrying, including themselves. Then the movie moved into the domestic violence storyline. And this is where things became even more complicated for me personally. Because part of me, as a viewer, understood why the ending worked emotionally: the reconciliation, the lingering love, the regret, the possibility of forgiveness. It was dramatically effective. But another part of me, the former prosecutor, was recoiling from it. Because years ago, I prosecuted domestic violence cases. And there was one particular case, a case that ultimately became the last case I ever handled as a prosecutor. A woman had accused her husband of abuse. The evidence was strong. I was ready for trial. Then the case got delayed, a continuance. A couple of days later, I got the call. He killed her. And the truth is, by that point, my body had already been trying to tell me something for a long time. Before that case, I had started suffering from these brutal migraine headaches, the kind where you end up lying in dark rooms, getting injections, seeing neurologists, running tests. And nobody could figure out what was causing them. Finally, my doctor hospitalized me because the migraines had gotten so severe. And after all the tests and all the scans, I remember him coming into the room and saying, "I finally figured out what's going wrong with you." And I thought he had discovered some neurological condition. But he looked at me and said, "It's your job." And I remember almost laughing because I didn't feel stressed. I liked being a prosecutor. I believed I was handling it. But he explained something I never forgot. He said, the body can learn to compensate for pain the same way people compensate for a bad toothache. At first, you notice it, then gradually you adapt. Then eventually, the body reaches a point where it can't compensate anymore. And he told me, I think that's what's happening to you. Your body is finally telling you it can't carry this anymore. And after that domestic violence case, I knew he was right. That was the case that made me leave the prosecutor's office. And once you live through something like that, once you've seen where domestic violence can lead, you stop watching stories like this the same way. Because while other audience members are asking, will they get back together? Another part of your mind is asking, will she ever really be safe again? And maybe that's what this episode is really about. Not politics, not taking sides, but the strange power cinema has to bypass our defenses, to quietly unlock doors we thought we had sealed shut years ago. I've spent much of my life compartmentalizing: military, law, medicine, government. You see difficult things, you hear difficult things, you carry difficult things. And you learn very quickly that if you want to function professionally, you put those experiences into little boxes and keep moving. Next mission, next case, next hearing, next responsibility. You survive by continuing forward. But art is strange. Sometimes cinema reaches past all of that training, past the compartmentalization, past the intellectual defenses, past the professional distance. And suddenly, you're not just watching a story anymore. You're confronting yourself. And maybe that's one of the reasons international cinema matters so much right now. Because when you watch stories from other countries, you begin to realize how small the world actually is. Different languages, different customs, different religions, different politics. But underneath all of that, human beings are still wrestling with the same things: love, fear, violence, regret, family, forgiveness. The issues in this film, domestic violence, abortion, trauma, compartmentalization, these are not American issues. They are not Indian issues or European issues or Asian issues. They are human issues, species-related issues. And I think great cinema has the ability to remind us of that, to remind us that underneath culture, geography, and politics, we are all still one species trying to figure out how to live with ourselves and each other. And maybe that's why this film affected me so deeply, because somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling foreign. It just felt human.